Hi guys, it's Sophie. So I'm doing a little bit of a late April wrap up. I've read so many books in April, which you probably saw from the thumbnail. I'm just gonna go, normally I try and do them like together, like try and get ones that are like one another or I felt the same about, but I'm just gonna go through them because there's a lot. So the first one that I have to talk about is Against Interpretation by Susan Sontag. I've never read Susan Sontag before this one, and this is a collection of essays on a variety of topics. I would say mostly like art criticism, and I quite enjoyed these, but some of them I did skip over, so some of them I actually didn't read the whole way through. I read quite a few where I didn't know the text or anything about the text, and I found I was missing too much. So I read sort of probably, I would say about half of the ones that are on specific pieces or specific plays, and then the other half of them I kind of started to read and was like, oh no, I'm not sure, or knew I knew nothing about them, and didn't read. I loved the way that she writes, and I definitely think I'd read the one that I think it's called On Illness, A Metaphor, which is about her being unwell. I think she had cancer. So it's not that I wouldn't read her again, but I did feel that I missed out because of the fact I didn't know the text that she was talking about. And the other thing I was thinking when I was reading this is I wish there was someone who was like similar to this, who writes about book criticism now. If you know people who do that, please comment down below. I said to Tom about it, I wish I knew who it was, and I'm sure there's people who do it, but I don't know who they are. So if that's your kind of jam, please do let me know. And then next I read this one, which is called Nobody Told Me by Hollie McNish, and it's poetry and prose in this one. This is a story, a kind of memoir slash poetry collection based on her real life. And she tells a story from when she is pregnant with her first child through to when the child is about 3 years old. And she tells this in sections of prose and then poems that follow. Again, with this one, I read probably half of it with the poems included, but I wasn't really enjoying the poetry as much as I was enjoying the prose, and this poetry style was very like easily accessible and quite simple, and I found that actually I kind of ended up, when I was reading the poems too, like kind of doubling up on what I thought about the prose. So I ended up skipping the poems from about halfway on, and I still really liked it. I think maybe if that kind of poetry is more your thing, you might really like this whole thing. But I've been reading quite a few little books about motherhood and parenthood recently, because it's something I feel I don't know very much about, and yeah, I definitely did enjoy the bits I read, but it is worth caveating with the fact I didn't actually read all of it because I didn't like the poetry so much. And the next one that I read is a short story collection, and that is I Want to Show You More by Quatro. I was anticipating this so highly before it came out, and yeah, it didn't let me down. There's one that like, as I think of this book, I think of a lot, which is the one about a church, and it's quite hard to kind of describe the church, but basically there's a standard church that they go into and begin to kind of dismantle the ideas that the church is built upon. I would say quite a lot of these stories combine sex and religion, which I find really interesting, because I feel like that's not the kind of thing that I've ever read about, was either people talking quite explicitly about affairs or sexual relationships and there being like religious undertones, and that's what I loved so much about Fire Sermon. So I'm so glad that that kind of carried on and that I got to get into those bits again. I really enjoyed most of these short stories, I would say, but the one that sticks with me in my head the most is the image of this church at the end, and I don't want to spoil it because I do think it's worth reading, but that was probably my favourite of the lot. There's another one here that I would say is really like unusual, but again I really liked it, which is about runners who run with statues to run marathons, and if you run marathons you get statues, and you want to try and win the race to run a race without a statue. That story was fantastic as well. So there are some that are kind of more like realist and some that are more fabulous, and I have to say I really liked the ones that were more fabulous, and just like that hint of weirdness or that hint of kind of magic in them. I would definitely read this again. I really did like it, and I think if you enjoyed Fire Sermon you'll definitely like I Want to Show You More. So even though it's a different format, you get the same sense as you get through her novel. The next one I read I was quite disappointed with in the end, and I don't want to kind of go on about it too much because I've sent it for review, but that one is Black Car Burning by Helen Mort, and this is quite a complicated storyline. You have lots of different characters. There are characters in here polyamorous, so they have different girlfriends and boyfriends rather than just being monogamous and having one. There is some like gay content, some women who are in love with women, There's a lot about climbing, which you can probably see from here, and all of those things meant I was really enjoying it, kind of, I'd say for the first third. I felt that there were too many things that felt a little bit like they were left unanswered, and I found that quite unsatisfying. So an example of that was at the very beginning of the book. There's a police officer who hears a rumour that a baby's been stolen and is trying to be sold, or at least a baby's trying to be sold, I don't know if it was stolen, but trying to be sold in this town. And the woman who is the police community support officer has quite a big role throughout, but we kind of never find out anything about that again. So there were just little things that were put in that I felt needed to be like wrapped up in some way, even if it was only just someone saying that was a rumour. And there's a lot around here as well about like the different people who live in this environment. So there's people who consider themselves to be proper English, who are like all the generations back in their family, and then there are more recent immigrants, and then there are people who've literally just come to the UK, and there's a lot of tensions between these groups. So even just to have a resolution like that would have made me feel a little bit more like it was finished. I think this is her first novel, and she normally writes poetry, but I just found elements of it quite unsatisfying because of that, and I did sort of start to lose my love of it, I would say, after the first third. But yeah, so that's Black Hole Burning. It might appeal to you. I think people are really excited for this one because it's set in the north as well, and I'm not from the north, so maybe there's an element of that that will pull you through the whole way as well. Or if you like climbing, again, that's the other thing I would say that's going to be like, you should probably read this book. And then the next one I have is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. And this book is really interesting. I really did like it as I was reading through it. I read it quite quick. I read it when last bank holiday weekend. And this is about a little girl who was born with these gods inside her. I would say is probably the best way to describe them, with small gods inside her who are kind of talking to her throughout her life. I don't want to say too much about what happens with that, though that's the most interesting part of the book, is what happens with these gods as she goes through her life. But you have a sense that they're much greater than she is, and a sense of the separateness between her and the gods. What I would say, to try not to spoil what happens in terms of the story, is that this is kind of talking about mental illness and identity and selfhood, and like obviously then there's like mythological element as well, of you can kind of read it both ways. Yeah, I did really like it. I can't really explain much more about it than that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can say. Oh, it does move around, so we start in Nigeria and then we move to the US later on in the book. So again, it's kind of people in different scenarios, and I thought that was really good. And the next one I read I've spoken about a little bit, and that is The Parade by Dave Eggers. I really like Dave Eggers, and I like this one. I've liked other ones of his more, but I still did enjoy this. This is about a pair of men who are road contractors in this foreign country that we never know the name of, who've been at war with themselves. So there's a great civil war going on, and they're coming in to build this road. The civil war has ended, so there's sort of the debris of war and the after effects of war going on, but they're building this road to try and connect the north and the south in this kind of new time of peace. Yeah, I really liked it. Tom really liked it. The characters are like very easy to like because they're two very like diametrically opposed characters. One's very laid back, one's very serious, and it's really short as well. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing that Dave Eggers normally does, which is there's an idea, you go through, and then there's a thing sort of toward the end part of the novel, and you think a lot. And yes, I would recommend it. I think this one's fairly new out as well. And the next one that I read was one that Tom gave to me when I was unwell with my teeth, and that is The Flight of Cornelia Blackwood by Susan Elliot Wright. This is a book I think I might have picked up on my own if I'd have read the dust jacket, but the cover didn't like grab me. So this is one I definitely wouldn't have picked up, I don't think, unless I'd heard someone else talking about it. So it was quite interesting to have Tom give this one to me. And the reason why he put it in there is because it says that it's written a truly important novel which explores the dark depths of psychosis with honesty and sensitivity, which is a big tick in my box. This follows a woman who has lost many of her children, and her relationship with the children that she's lost and the children that she keeps. I don't know that it's necessarily like a thriller, but it does feel as though I could easily spoil it, which is why I'm like choosing my words very carefully. But the main themes are about motherhood and mental illness, I would say. and it's very dark and twisty. Yeah, it's probably kind of like a thriller I'd recommend for people who don't normally read thrillers, because whilst there are like some plot twisty elements to it, it didn't feel like I was trying to concentrate all the way through as to who's done it or what's happened, because you could kind of tell quite easily what had happened, but maybe not like how it happened. So that's that one, and yeah, I quite like this experience of having someone pick me out a book that I really hadn't known about and probably wouldn't have grabbed. And I don't know that I've seen anyone else talking about this one as of yet either, which is always, I always think that's quite exciting when you find something that not so many people have talked about yet. The next one I've done a full review video on, so you can go and check that one out if you'd like to, and that is The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. I really enjoyed this a lot, and I think it may turn up in my best books of the year. So yes, do go and check that one out, that review out, if you're interested. Next I have Crimson by Korneliussen, and I've spoken about this book already because I spoke about this book in my vlog, but just briefly, this is a story about a number of like young adults living in Greenland who are kind of generally, I would say, like exploring queerness. I think that's probably the blanket way that I'd describe that. So there's lots of people determining who they are in terms of their own skin, and also who they love and who they like in terms of other people. It's very messy, and I did like it. I think a lot of people have kind of said like, yeah, after they've read it. I did actually like it. And I felt like the messiness quite suited it. I didn't love it, but I did give it 4 stars, so I did really enjoy what it was. And I thought it was really interesting to read about like the experience of queerness in a country that's completely different to the country I live in. So I didn't know like at all how Greenland would treat people who were LGBTQ+. That just wasn't even really in my head, and I think I'd kind of assumed to be more like the Scandi model of how those people are treated. I don't know that it is necessarily, so I found that really interesting, and it was just nice to read like a messy novel not about people from England or America as well. I'd love to like have more of these from like France or Spain or Germany or whatever. That would be cool too. So I really enjoyed reading Crimson, and I think people would like it. I don't think it's just me. Maybe it is just me, but I think other people might like this too. Next one I picked up was Saga Volume 5. Again, I've spoken about this one already, so just briefly, this is a continuation of the Saga series, and I did like this one. I found I had been put off a little bit by the time I got to Volume 4, but this one picked it back up for me, and I was definitely glad I read it. I don't know whether I'll borrow the future ones from the library or whether I'll buy them, because it is expensive for something you can read in like a couple hours, but there's also the side of me that says, well, you have 5. But yeah, I think if I knew how long it was going to be, I'd decide to buy them. If it was going to be like there are 10, I'd be like, oh, okay, cool. But if there's going to be like 30, then I'd really probably be like, yeah, I think I will borrow the rest. And the next one that I read was NP by Yoshimoto, and this is a story about a writer who has written a number of stories that are very popular, and it's kind of really well known. Like lots of people know who they are. They're very enigmatic, this author, and there are some lost stories that people who are related to this author, who's now died, in various ways have access to and are trying to translate. It's a little bit magic-ish. It's not massively magic. There's just a sense of things happening that wouldn't necessarily happen that way, or superstition maybe is maybe the right way to call it. And I did enjoy reading it, but I really didn't enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed reading Kitchen, which was a bit of a shame because I thought it was going to be a similar thing. I think probably what I enjoyed about it more was just that I was getting back into like some Japanese writing, and I really do like Japanese writing in terms of like a lot of the books that we get are of a certain style, and that the descriptive style, I think, of a lot of books I've read written in Japanese and translated to English, I enjoy. So that was really good. But yeah, I think if you're going to read Banana Yoshimoto, definitely try Kitchen first, because I do think that's better of the 2 of them I've read. The next one I read was Because I Wanted to Write You a Pop Song by Vernor, and this is a really, really tiny short story collection. I didn't get on with this one. I didn't find the writing particularly brilliant. I thought it was a little bit too gory rather than exploring darkness, and I think the stories are quite forgettable. So I think this is one of my first 1 stars actually of the year, so yeah, I wouldn't recommend that one. The next one that I read I was expecting to like more than I liked, and I think it's because I'd expected it to be something it wasn't, and that's Memento Mori by Muriel. I think I thought this was more of a mystery than it is, and it's not really a mystery. It's more about exploring the idea that we will die, which makes sense from the title, but I'd had in my head that this was more of a mystery. So as I was reading it, I was like, I'm not sure that this is a mystery, and was a little bit disappointed by that. I have since listened to an Agatha Christie, which definitely are mysteries, and that satisfied what I thought this would be. It's quite hard for me to judge the book apart from that, because I think my reading experience was marred by the fact I was expecting it to be something it wasn't, which is a shame. Yeah, I think that's really all I can say about it, because I don't want to say the things I didn't like, because the things I didn't like was something the book isn't. So I think I'm just going to leave that one here. I think I may well read this again at some future point in time, with the knowledge that it is actually the novel that it is, and I think I'll probably get a lot more from it, because to be honest, I nearly finished it before thinking, oh, actually this isn't going to go the way I was expecting it to go. I'll have to try and read another Muriel Spark at some stage soon. I think I've read 2 of her books before, and that means I don't know quite why I thought this was such a mystery, but maybe it was the cover as well. But yes, unfortunately for this book, I wasn't in the right place for it. The next one I have is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, and this is one I didn't really know anything about going in. I think it's a love story, sort of. I think that's kind of how I describe it, like it's a story about love, but not necessarily like a romance. I did like this. There was a barrier for me in reading this that I had to try quite hard, because a lot of the dialect is written as it would be spoken. I'm not used to that, and I don't think that it was like purposefully dense or hard to understand. And I think if you grew up hearing language like that, you'd know exactly what it meant straight away. I did actually talk to my partner about it, because I was like, can you understand this, or is it a bit like you're trying to go through it in your head? Like I have to say it in my head, and I go, oh okay, that's that. And he could read it fine. So I think it's probably more an issue with me than it is with the book. I think I just found that hard. But that was quite a good part. I thought that was a really important part of the book as well. So it's not that I'd say I wouldn't want that. I think that was really important. But I had to try quite hard to get where I would normally be. And I was kind of reflecting on it afterwards. And I think it's because I have a really fast reading speed. And a lot of the words, because they are as they are spoken, aren't words that my brain would recognise, so it just made me pause and go, oh, that isn't a word, as in that isn't the word that I know in my head, and go, oh, I wonder what that is, and then I'd have to speak through the sentences. So this took me, I don't know, I'd probably say a couple of days longer than it normally would, of kind of speaking through the speech. But beyond that, sort of putting that to one side, because I think that's what I found difficult about the book. It's really beautiful. It's really a really lovely story, and there's this tragedy at the end, and yeah, and the dog. And I did really enjoy it. I really felt for our characters in the book, and as I say, I think it's a story about love. I don't think it's a romance, but I think overall it's a story about people loving people. The next one that I have is The Remainder by Alia Chubiko-Zaran, and this was a really weird book. I wanted to like it more than I liked it. There are a few other books I've read from like Central America that I've enjoyed much more, and the problem I had was that I kept reflecting back on what I'd liked about those when I was reading this. This is good, and it's not that I wanted it to be something else, but it was just very strange. So if I kind of just tell you a little bit about the story, we have 3 main characters who are a boy who sees the dead and counts the dead from the living. We have his sister, who I think is a lesbian. I think that's probably the best way to describe her. She could be bisexual, but she has an attraction to this other woman, and the other woman joins the story, and her mother has died. The story is basically these 3 young adults going across Chile looking for the body of this mother. I can see why a lot of people really like it. The problem I had with this, I think, was actually the boy and his counting of the dead. The 2 girls' storylines I felt I could connect to and get at where they are. The boy I kept kind of teetering between him being a symbol only and him being a character who is mad, and I found that a little frustrating. It was quite funny at points, but a really dark funny, like the kind of funny where you think, like they drive a hearse and it breaks down and you're like, that isn't funny, but it's that dark kind of shock funny that you have sometimes, and I think I had quite a few of those like dark shock funny things, I think the reason why I didn't enjoy this as much as I could have done is because I thought it was going to be completely for me, and it was good and I quite enjoyed reading it, but it wasn't completely for me. There were other things in it. I don't know, it's really hard to describe. Sometimes you pick something up because it ticks a lot of your boxes and you get really, really excited before then, and I think I'd overhyped it a bit in my head as to what it was trying to achieve, and even though it was kind of exactly how I thought it was going to go, it still didn't click with me to make it like a 5-star book. But I did really like it, and I didn't want to like bash on it, but there are just other things that kept creeping into my head that I enjoyed and wanted to reread when I was reading it. The next one I read, I kind of enjoyed. So these we seem to be getting more negative as we go on. I kind of enjoyed. Again, when I was reading this, I was thinking about other stuff I'd read, and that is Bottled Goods by Sophie Van Leeuwen. I think this book is, well, they're short vignettes about a girl and a woman's life under communist kind of rule, and the ways in which she has to be very careful around that. There's also elements of folk stories put in, mostly around shrinking relatives. So there's a couple of shrunk relatives, so there's real magic in here too, if that makes sense. Like, there's magic that is real in the book. And I did like reading it. My problem was, because I did Round the World last year, I read quite a lot of stories from Europe focusing on what communism felt like and was like. And whilst this had the kind of dread that I would have expected from it, because I've read these other stories, and actually the Romanian author I read last year as well, it was so horrific and so visceral what these other books were writing about. I didn't feel like this hit for what I wanted. And I don't know whether that is unfair on the book, because probably the book I read from Romania last year was like the best book in Romania, if that makes sense, because you Google books translated and you get the top few results, so it's probably a really popular book. And I know this is like a new release, and it's probably a bit like if I was saying I've only read 2 books from America and one of them was like Ernest Hemingway or something. But yeah, I think you're probably going to find this most interesting either if you're really interested in communism and want to hear like a mythical take on it written in a nice way, or if you don't know so much about it at all. I think where I am in that kind of middle ground of having read quite a few of them last year and then reading this one now put me in a bit of a bad position for Bottled Goods. 2 left. The next one I have is Sing of the Shore by Lucy Wood. This is a collection of short stories that are all set in rural Cornwall, and they are set and around the people who actually live in Cornwall as opposed to the people who go in and out of Cornwall, or grockles, which I think that's what Cornwall uses as well, that's what we say here. And again, I think this hit the nail on the head for what it was, to be honest. It's stories about like wild children trying to clamber up cliffs. The one I remember best is about a selection of friends who try to look for treasure, and they go every year because they have kind of nothing, like that they are so reliant on like tourism and trades around that, and when it comes to winter there's nothing, so they kind of start to look for this treasure in a really desperate way, and they're just picking up like any odds and ends, metal odds and ends from beaches. I really liked the realness of this. The thing I look for in rural stories, and this is pretty much always true, is for the reflection of actually how dark and damp and lonely the countryside can be. And I think for people who read books about the countryside but have lived in cities their whole lives, there's quite often this really like idealised version of what it's actually like day to day. And there is always a sense for me of like, you should see it in November when no one's here and there are no leaves and there's no one for miles. And this got that bit of it for me. And it's not that I don't think the countryside's beautiful and gorgeous, of course I do. But I get a bit frustrated when books written about the countryside are depicted only in this really positive, almost clean light, whereas the countryside is a really dark and dirty place in reality. And I think this hit it really well, and I haven't read anything that was set like that in Cornwall. The ones, oh, what's he called? I've forgotten his name. If I remember, I'll put the link down in the box below. But he's written two books, and one's called The Dig. And again, this is about like people who are living in the middle of nowhere, and there's this lack of money and lack of investment, and it's about drugs, but it gives you the same thing of like, this isn't a perfect place that you go on holiday. There are people who live here year round, and not all of their lives are pretty. And I just really appreciated it for that. I definitely recommend it if you're into rural stories, because I think they're harder to come by. Publishing is very urban centric in its nature. We don't have lots of people who work in publishing who work in the midst of nowhere. It's mostly London in the UK. So this did a bit for me of what I think maybe Black Card Burning would do for other people, and I would definitely recommend it. The next one that I have is really on the same kind of theme, and that is A Line Made by Walking by Sarah Baum. This is about a girl who I would say is really quite mentally unwell, though in reading it you might not necessarily get that, though I definitely see that. And she really can't cope with her life, and she goes to live in the middle of nowhere in her deceased grandma's bungalow in the countryside. And she is very depressed. This is for me a book mostly about depression. And she is living here alone with this lack of support network, with just herself and the emptiness of this countryside around her. So it's again that kind of like almost, I'm going to call it like rural noir. And she starts taking pictures of these dead animals and exploring the way that she's thinking. One of the reasons I love this book so much, and I know this, and this won't apply to lots of people, is because this really reminded me of Tom. When I met Tom, he was living in his family's home, which was empty, in the middle of nowhere in Exmoor, and was not in a good way at all. Because I've seen that, I couldn't help but feel for her so strongly when I was reading this. I do think even if you haven't had a partner who's lived in the middle of nowhere in a farm to go escape from things, you can relate to this character and her loneliness and her desire to hide from the world because she's not doing very well. And I just thought it was brilliant. I want to read it again. And I'm looking for more of this. I'm looking for more dark English countryside stuff. I would love to have like a really good selection to do like a recommends video on it, but it's quite hard to come by. The book I'm reading at the minute, actually, just digressing slightly from the books, is The Western Wind by Samantha Harvey, which is a historical dark novel written in rural Somerset, which is a little bit out of my realm of normal reading. But I've been trying quite hard to find books like this. So if you are like, you know of lots of dark rural stuff, I'd quite like to read them. It's something I want to read more of, and I've struggled to find. And I have literally Googled like books from and then inside county, and then searched through to find anything that's like written in the last 100 years, and I'm struggling. So if you guys know, repository of knowledge that you all are, please do let me know. Yeah, that's everything I've read. It's a lot of books. How many is it? Yeah, 18 books, which I don't think is bad at all. Bearing in mind I was off work basically for a week with my teeth, and we had a bank holiday in there, so there was a little bit of help in April. I don't think I'm going to read half as much in May. I also can't believe it's May. Yeah, so hopefully there's something interesting in here. The video has been so long that my camera decided to shut off midway through, so we'll see what I've lost from there. Yeah, look after yourselves until I see you again. Tell me of those which ones you've either read or would like to read, and please, if you know any of like dark rural stories, I would like all of them, please. Okay, I'll chat to you guys again soon. Bye.